The girl cried softly, locked inside the dog's cage as if she were an animal. Outside, the stepmother screamed mercilessly, ignoring the fear in the child's eyes. Without making a sound, the millionaire opens the door of the house and witnesses the absurd scene. What he does next not only changes the girl's fate, but exposes a cruel truth that no one imagined. Before listening to this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more exciting tales. The office on the 23rd floor of the commercial building in the capital seemed more like a gilded prison to Marco Allianz. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city, but he rarely lifted his eyes from the financial reports piling up on his desk. For 6 months, since Helena left with only a suitcase and behind 2 confused children and a bewildered husband, Marco had plunged into his work, like someone drowning in turbulent waters, searching for anything that would keep him afloat. The separation had been sudden, unexpected. Helena simply announced that she needed to find herself and that domestic life was suffocating her. Marco still remembered her last words before crossing the threshold. The children will be better off without a mother who can't be happy. Since then, the 4-bedroom house in the upscale neighborhood of the city had become a silent place, where children's laughter was increasingly rare. 8-year-old Olivia had become an introverted girl, spending hours in her room drawing or reading books that seemed too big for her age. Her large, expressive eyes, which had once sparkled with mischief, now carried a melancholy that broke Marco's heart whenever he allowed himself to truly look at her. Theo, the youngest at only 2 years old, cried frequently, searching for his mother in every room of the house, a search that invariably ended in tears. Rose, the housekeeper, who had worked for the family for over 5 years, tried to fill the emotional void left by Helena, but her responsibilities were limited to practical care. She prepared meals, took the children to school, and supervised baths and bedtime. However, Marco knew that Rose could not replace the maternal affection that his children so desperately needed. It was on a rainy Tuesday in April that Agnes appeared in their lives. Marco had arrived home later than usual, finding the children already asleep and Rose tidying up the kitchen. The middle-aged woman, with neatly styled blonde hair and a warm smile, was sitting in the living room, leafing through a magazine. "Excuse my intrusion," said Agnes, rising gracefully. "I am Agnes Muller. I was a very good friend of Helena's. I heard about the situation and came to offer my help." Marco watched her curiously. Helena had never mentioned an Agnes, but in the last few months of their marriage, his wife had become reserved about her friendships and activities. "Help in what way?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Taking care of the children, helping Rose, being an emotional support for Olivia and Theo," Agnes replied with apparent sincerity. "I've worked as a childcare provider for years, and I know the difficulties a family faces at times like this. Helena always spoke of you and the children with such affection. It would be an honor to be able to help." The offer sounded like a godsend to Marco. For weeks, he had been struggling with guilt over spending so little time with his children, but the demands of the office seemed increasingly urgent. The company was undergoing a major restructuring, and his presence was crucial to securing the most lucrative contracts. "That would be very generous of you," Marco replied, feeling an unexpected relief. "But I need to know more about you. References, experience." Agnes smiled, pulling an envelope from her bag. "Of course, I prepared everything in advance. Here are my credentials, references from previous families, and a background check. I completely understand your caution." The documents looked impeccable: letters of recommendation, certificates from courses in child development, clean records. Marco flipped through everything quickly, his mind already calculating how Agnes's presence could make his routine easier. "I can start tomorrow if it's convenient," Agnes offered. "I'd like to get to know the children better and understand their specific needs." That night, Marco slept better than he had in months. Finally, a solution to the dilemma that had been consuming him. Someone who could give the children the attention they deserved while he focused on rebuilding his family's finances. The following morning, Agnes arrived promptly at 7 o'clock, carrying a small suitcase and a radiant smile. Olivia, initially shy, quickly warmed up to her new caregiver, who showed a genuine interest in her drawings and stories. Theo, always more sociable, accepted Agnes almost immediately, allowing her to help him with breakfast without resistance. "She seems very affectionate," Rose commented to Marco before he left for work. "The children are already more cheerful." Marco watched from the kitchen window as Agnes played in the garden with Theo, while Olivia sat drawing at the picnic table. For the first time in months, the house seemed to have life again. During the first few weeks, the transformation was remarkable. Agnes organized creative activities for Olivia, established more structured routines for Theo, and even suggested changes to the children's bedroom decor to make them more welcoming. Marco would come home to find his children smiling, with stories to tell about their day. Agnes also proved to be an excellent household manager. She reorganized Rose's schedule, optimized weekly shopping, and even suggested a nutritionist to improve the children's diet. Marco was impressed by her efficiency and dedication. "You've been a blessing to our family," Marco told Agnes one Friday night, finding her organizing toys in the living room. "I don't know how to thank you." Agnes smiled gently. "Seeing the children happy is reward enough. Helena would be proud to know that you are taking such good care of them." The mention of Helena brought a pang of melancholy, but Marco quickly dismissed it. He had learned to avoid thoughts of his ex-wife, focusing on the present and the future. As the days went by, Agnes took on increasingly greater responsibilities. She accompanied the children to medical appointments, attended school meetings, and even suggested changes to Marco's schedule so that he could spend more time at home. "Perhaps you could work from home some afternoons," Agnes suggested gently. "The children would really miss your presence." The suggestion made sense, but Marco felt uncomfortable with the idea of mixing his professional and personal life. The office was his refuge, the place where he maintained control over his life when everything else seemed uncertain. "It's not the right time yet," Marco replied. "The company needs me physically present during this transition phase." Agnes agreed understandingly, but Marco noticed a flicker of something in her eyes. Disappointment, perhaps frustration. It was only for a moment, and soon she was smiling again with her usual sweetness. Olivia, in turn, began to show an increasing dependence on Agnes. The girl, who had previously been reserved and independent, now constantly sought her caregiver's approval, asking her opinion about clothes, school activities, and even how to interact with her classmates. Agnes said, "I should wear more pink because it matches my eyes," Olivia commented during dinner, wearing a pink dress that Marco didn't remember buying. "Since when have you liked pink?" Marco asked, recalling that his daughter's favorite color had always been blue. Olivia shrugged. "Agnes said pretty girls wear pink." Marco looked at Agnes, who simply smiled sweetly. "I'm helping Olivia explore different aspects of her femininity. It's important that she feels confident in her appearance." Although the explanation seemed reasonable, something bothered Marco. Olivia had always been a determined and independent child, with strong opinions about her preferences. Seeing this sudden change in her personality was disconcerting. Rose also began to seem uncomfortable with some of the changes implemented by Agnes. During a brief conversation in the kitchen, the housekeeper subtly expressed her concerns. "The children are different," Rose murmured as she prepared lunch. "Quieter, more too obedient, if you know what I mean." Marco frowned. "That's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe they're finally adapting to the new situation." "Perhaps," Rose agreed, but her expression betrayed doubt. That night, Marco decided to have a longer conversation with the children during dinner. He asked about school, friends, and favorite activities. The answers came mechanically, as if rehearsed. Olivia spoke about her new imaginary friend, a princess who always wore pink dresses and obeyed all the rules. Theo simply nodded, agreeing with everything his sister said. After putting the children to bed, Marco found Agnes organizing papers in the kitchen. She appeared to be making notes in a small notebook. "What are you writing?" Marco asked casually. Agnes quickly closed her notebook. "Just a few observations about the children's development. I like to keep records to track their emotional progress." The explanation sounded professional, but something about the haste with which Agnes put the notebook away piqued Marco's curiosity. He decided not to press her at the moment, but a small seed of unease was planted in his mind. That night, Marco had trouble falling asleep, reflecting on the changes in his family. The children seemed calmer, more disciplined, but they had lost some of the spontaneity and joy that characterized them. Was this just a natural adjustment phase, or was something else happening under his roof? The first truly worrying sign emerged 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning. Marco had decided to spend the weekend at home, a rare decision he made after reflecting on Rose's comments. He wanted to observe the family dynamic more closely and perhaps recover some of the connection he had lost with his children. He woke up early and went down to the kitchen, expecting to find the house still quiet. He was surprised to hear low voices coming from the living room. Agnes was sitting on the sofa with Olivia, showing her photographs in an album that Marco didn't recognize. "Did you see how obedient this girl is?" Agnes said, pointing to a photo. "She always listens to the adults and never questions. What they say, that's why she's happy." Olivia nodded solemnly. "How can I become like her?" "Keep being a good girl, doing everything I teach you. And remember, our conversation is a special secret between us, okay?" Marco felt a shiver run down his spine. Secrets between adults and children were always a cause for concern. He cleared his throat loudly, announcing his presence. Agnes turned around with a bright smile, quickly closing the album. "Good morning, Marco. What a surprise to see you awake so early on a Saturday." "Good morning," Marco replied, noticing Olivia's expression, which seemed slightly frightened. "What were you two doing?" "I was just showing Olivia some photos from my time as a teacher," Agnes explained calmly. She showed interest in learning what it was like to work with children. Marco sat down next to his daughter. "What kind of photos?" Olivia glanced quickly at Agnes before answering. "Photos of girls from Aunt Agnes's school." The term Aunt Agnes sounded strange to Marco's ears. When had Agnes become an aunt? He decided not to comment at the moment, but mentally noted this change as well. "Daddy, can I go play in the garden?" Olivia asked, avoiding her father's gaze. "Of course, darling." As soon as Olivia left, Marco turned to Agnes. "Since when does she call me Daddy? It's always been Father." Agnes laughed softly. "Daddy sounds more affectionate, don't you think? I'm helping her express her feelings better." The explanation seemed forced, but Marco couldn't articulate exactly why he felt uncomfortable. Perhaps it was paranoia, a result of the stress of the last few months. During lunch, Marco attentively observed the family interactions. Agnes served the children with military efficiency, cutting Theo's food into uniformly small pieces and reminding Olivia to maintain an upright posture during the meal. "Agnes said that elegant girls always eat slowly and never make noise," Olivia explained, when Marco commented on how she was eating differently. "And since when do you want to be a classy girl?" Marco asked with genuine curiosity. Olivia hesitated, looking at Agnes. Ever since I learned that it's important." Rose, who was serving dessert, made a subtle grimace that only Marco noticed. After lunch, he followed her into the kitchen. "Rose, can I talk to you?" The 50-year-old woman, always straightforward and honest, looked around nervously before answering. "Of course, Mr. Marco. Have you noticed anything different about the children?" Rose sighed deeply. "Sir, I don't mean to speak ill of anyone, but what?" "The children are very quiet. Olivia has always been talkative and curious. Now she asks Mrs. Agnes everything, even if she can go to the bathroom alone." Marco frowned. "She's asking if she can go to the bathroom. And Theo cries less, but that's because he spends more time in his crib. Mrs. Agnes says it's so he can learn discipline." A knot of anxiety gripped Marco. 2-year-olds didn't need to learn discipline through isolation. They needed affection, play, and interaction. "Anything else?" Rose hesitated again. "Mrs. Agnes doesn't like it when I talk too much to the children. She says they need consistency in their upbringing and that too many voices are confusing." Marco felt his worry growing with each revelation. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I tried, sir, but you were always busy. And Mrs. Agnes said it was best not to bother you with details of the household routine." Had Agnes said that? Marco didn't remember giving such advice. In fact, he had always encouraged Rose to communicate any concerns about the children. That afternoon, Marco decided to spend some individual time with each of his children. He started with Theo, playing on the living room floor with his favorite toys. The boy seemed more reserved than usual, frequently glancing at the door as if expecting someone to appear. "Does Theo like to play with Daddy?" Marco asked, purposefully using the term Agnes had introduced. Theo nodded, but without his characteristic enthusiasm. Marco noticed that many of his son's favorite toys were no longer in their boxes. "Where's the red truck you love so much?" "Aunt Agnes said it's for big boys," Theo replied, still in his childish pronunciation. Little Theo. Marco felt his irritation growing. Theo was only just beginning to speak in simple sentences, and someone was limiting his playfulness based on arbitrary age concepts. With Olivia, the conversation was even more revealing. The girl showed her recent drawings, all depicting girls in pink dresses, in rigid poses, surrounded by smiling adults. "Your drawings have changed," Marco observed. "Where are those colorful ones you used to do with animals and landscapes? Agnes said that princess drawings are more appropriate for girls my age." "And do you like drawing princesses?" Olivia hesitated, a confused expression crossing her face. I think so." The uncertainty in his daughter's voice alarmed Marco. Olivia had always been decisive about her preferences, fiercely defending her artistic choices. "Olivia, do you remember when we used to draw together? You taught me how to make those colorful dinosaurs." The girl's eyes sparkled for a moment. "I remember, and you always drew the dinosaurs with big smiles. Want to draw dinosaurs with me now?" Olivia glanced at the door, then back at her father. "Agnes said dinosaurs are scary for girls." "But you've never been afraid of them before." "No, but Agnes knows more about these things." Marco took a deep breath, trying to control his growing irritation. Agnes was systematically erasing her daughter's personality, replacing her natural preferences with a set of rigid, stereotypical rules. That night, after putting the children to bed, Marco found Agnes in the kitchen making tea. She greeted him with her usual smile, but he noticed that her eyes seemed to be calculating something. "Agnes, I need to talk to you about some changes I've noticed in the children." "Of course," she replied, pouring 2 cups of tea. "I'm glad. You noticed our progress." "Progress?" "The children are more disciplined, more well-behaved. Olivia is learning to be a young lady, and Theo is developing self-control." Marco accepted the cup, inhaling the soft aroma of the tea. "Agnes, they're children. Olivia is 8, Theo is 2. They don't need to behave like adults." Agnes tilted her head, a look of maternal concern crossing her face. "Marco, I know this is difficult for you, especially after everything you've been through with Helena. But children need structure, clear boundaries. The trauma of separation can have lasting effects if it's not dealt with properly." The mention of Helena struck a nerve. Marco felt his defenses weakening slightly. What kind of trauma? Abandonment, insecurity, fear that other adults might also leave. That's why it's important for them to learn to trust stable authority figures and follow consistent guidance. Agnes's words sounded psychologically grounded, but something about the way she delivered them made Marco feel manipulated. She was using his guilt as an absent father and his grief over Helena's departure against him. "I understand the need for stability," Marco said carefully, "but I don't want them to lose their individuality in the process." Agnes smiled, understandingly. "Of course not. I'm simply guiding them so they can express their individuality in a more mature and appropriate way." Marco took a sip of the tea, which had a slightly bitter taste. "Agnes, can you show me that album you were looking at with Olivia this morning?" Agnes's expression changed almost imperceptibly. "Album?" "The one with photos of her former students." "Ah, yes. I left it in my room. I can pick it up for you tomorrow if you want." "Why not now?" Agnes laughed softly. "I'm so tired, Marco. It's been a long day with the children. Would you mind if we left it for tomorrow?" Marco nodded, but mentally noted the evasive answer. Why didn't Agnes want to show the photos immediately? As the night wore on, Marco felt strangely sleepy. The tea seemed to have a stronger calming effect than usual. He climbed up to his room with difficulty, attributing his drowsiness to the emotional stress of the conversation. The next morning, he woke up later than he had planned, feeling confused and slightly nauseous. When he went down to the kitchen, he found Agnes preparing the children's breakfast with her usual efficiency. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she said cheerfully. "You looked so tired last night that I made you a special relaxing tea." Relaxing tea? A herbal blend I learned from my grandmother. It helps with stress and insomnia. Marco accepted the explanation, but a part of his mind registered that he hadn't mentioned any trouble sleeping. How did Agnes know he needed something relaxing? During breakfast, she observed the children more closely. They ate silently with mechanical movements, occasionally glancing at Agnes as if seeking approval. Childlike spontaneity had almost completely disappeared. "Olivia, how about we go to the park today?" Marco suggested. The girl looked immediately at Agnes. "May I, Aunt Agnes?" "Of course, dear, but remember the rules we discussed about public behavior." Marco frowned. "What rules?" "Just basic guidelines on safety and education," Agnes explained. "Don't run too fast. Don't talk to strangers. Always stay close to responsible adults." The rules sounded reasonable, but the way Olivia reacted to them suggested there were more layers of control than Agnes was revealing. In the park, Marco watched with growing alarm as Olivia behaved. She played in a restrained manner, avoiding spontaneous interactions with other children and constantly checking to see if he was watching. When a boy her age approached to play, Olivia recoiled, muttering something about it not being appropriate. "Since when is playing with other children inappropriate?" Marco asked as they were walking home. "Agnes said that I need to be selective about my friendships, that not every child has been properly raised." Marco stopped walking, turning to look directly at his daughter. "Olivia, do you like playing alone?" The question seemed to confuse the girl. She opened her mouth to answer, closed it, then tried again. I don't know." The response hit Marco like a punch to the gut. His daughter, who had always been social and decisive, no longer knew whether she liked playing alone or with others. Someone had undermined her self-confidence to such an extent that she doubted her own basic preferences. That night, Marco made a decision. He needed to investigate more deeply who Agnes Muller was and what she was really doing to his family. His intuition told him that the changes in the children were not the result of disciplined upbringing, but of something more sinister, systematic psychological manipulation. While Agnes was bathing the children, Marco discreetly went to the guest room where she was staying. The door was closed but not locked. He entered silently, searching for the photo album mentioned the previous morning. The room was impeccably organized, almost sterile in its perfection. Clothes folded neatly in the closet, toiletries lined up on the dresser. A bed made from hospital-grade corner pieces. It was the room of someone who had no intention of forming attachments to the space, only occupying it temporarily. Marco opened the bedside table drawer and found the notebook he had seen Agnes writing in. His curiosity overcame his scruples about privacy, and he began to leaf through the pages. What he found made his blood run cold. The notebook was filled with detailed notes about his family, written in meticulous handwriting that looked more like a clinical report than casual observations. Marco read with growing horror the pages that documented every aspect of his children's lives. Olivia, strong personality, needs shaping. Initial resistance broken with conditioned positive reinforcement technique. Responds well to praise, followed by subtle criticism. Self-esteem in controlled decline. Ideal for emotional dependency. Marco felt nausea rising in his throat. Agnes was treating her daughter like a psychological experiment, methodically documenting how she was destroying her confidence. Theo, ideal age for imprinting. Easily moldable through stimulus restriction and isolation conditioning. Crying decreased by 73% in 2 weeks. Emotional responsiveness appropriately reduced. Marco's hands trembled as he turned the pages. There were graphs, tables, even anatomical drawings of the children, with notes on psychological pressure points and submission triggers. Marco Allianz, a negligent father, burdened with guilt. Vulnerable to manipulation through validation of parental competence. Mild sedation with herbal teas keeps his resistance low. Completely unaware of the behavioral changes in his children. Marco dropped his notebook, feeling as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Agnes was drugging him. The relaxing teas contained substances that kept him drowsy and less alert. That's why he had felt confused and had difficulty concentrating in recent weeks. He continued reading, discovering entire pages dedicated to Rose. The domestic worker represents an obstacle. She knows the children before my arrival and can detect changes. Strategy: gradually undermine authority, create friction with the father. Eventually, separation is necessary to gain total control of the environment. There were also notes about Helena. Ex-wife. Sudden and unexpected departure facilitated infiltration. Investigate the real causes of the separation. Possible future contact could compromise the operation. Marco stopped at the word operation. Was Agnes referring to what she was doing as an operation? That implied planning, specific objectives, perhaps even others involved. In the last pages of the notebook, he found something even more disturbing: a list of names and addresses with notes about target families and vulnerability status. He recognized some names from the city, families that had experienced divorces, family losses, or recent financial crises. Carmen family, widowed father with 3 children, high potential, awaiting the appropriate moment for contact. Salon family, recent separation, mother with depression, infiltration underway through an accomplice neighbor. Marco felt the horror turning into panic. Agnes wasn't an opportunistic caregiver who had taken advantage of his situation. She was part of something bigger, more organized. There was a network of people identifying and targeting vulnerable families. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made him quickly close the notebook and put it back in the drawer. He silently left the room, going down the stairs with his heart pounding violently. Agnes was in the kitchen preparing the children's evening snack. When she saw him, she smiled with the same fake sweetness as always. "Oh, Marco, I was looking for you. The children are ready for bed. Would you like to say good night to them?" Marco observed her with new eyes. How had he not noticed before the coldness behind her smile, the eyes that never truly warmed, the way she carefully measured each word? "Of course," he managed to say, his voice sounding strangely hoarse. In Olivia's room, Marco sat on the edge of the bed, observing his daughter's angelic face. She seemed smaller, more fragile than he remembered. How had Agnes managed to transform her so much in such a short time? "Dad," Olivia whispered as he said goodnight, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, darling." "Why did Mommy leave?" The question struck Marco like a bolt of lightning. Olivia had never asked directly about her mother's departure, and he had always assumed she had accepted the simple explanations she had been given. Mom needed some time to take care of herself," Marco replied, repeating the version he always used. "Agnes said that mothers who abandon their children don't deserve to be remembered, that it's better to forget them." Marco felt anger explode in his chest. Agnes was deliberately alienating her children from the memory of their mother, making them believe they had been abandoned and that they didn't deserve parental love. "Olivia, look at me," Marco said firmly. "Your mommy loves you very much. She hasn't abandoned you. Sometimes adults go through difficult times and need help. That doesn't mean she doesn't care about you." Olivia stared at him with wide, confused eyes. "But Agnes said many things, but not everything she says is true, dear." The girl seemed even more confused. "How will I know what's true?" The question broke Marco's heart. His daughter had lost the ability to trust her own judgment, conditioned to accept Agnes's word as absolute truth. "You can always trust what you feel here," Marco said, placing his hand over his daughter's heart. "And you can always talk to me about anything." Olivia nodded slowly, but Marco could still see the confusion in her eyes. In Theo's room, he found his son already asleep, but noticed something that alarmed him. The crib was positioned so that the child couldn't see the door or window, creating a feeling of isolation. Theo's favorite toys were piled up in a corner out of his reach. Marco discreetly rearranged the crib and placed some toys within his son's reach. Theo stirred in his sleep, unconsciously turning towards the new position of the door. Back in his own room, Marco locked the door and sat on the bed, trying to process everything he had discovered. He needed to act quickly, but also carefully. Agnes clearly had experience in manipulation and could be dangerous if she found out he had been investigating. His first priority was protecting the children, but he also needed evidence for the authorities. The notebook would be a good start, but he needed more information about the network of people involved. Marco called his lawyer, Victor Limen, a trusted man who had helped him during the divorce proceedings. "Marco, it's almost 10 o'clock at night. Is everything all right?" Victor answered, worried. "Victor, I need your help. Something very serious is happening with my family." Marco recounted everything he had discovered, from the changes in the children to the contents of the notebook. Victor listened in silence, occasionally making sounds of surprise and concern. "This sounds like a case for the police, Marco. If this woman is drugging you and psychologically manipulating your children, she needs to be removed immediately. But what if I don't have enough evidence? What if she simply denies everything? The notebook is in her room, and she could claim that I invaded her privacy." Victor thought for a moment. "We need to be strategic. First, let's document everything. Discreetly photograph the notebook, record conversations if possible, and seek an independent psychological evaluation for the children." "How long will this take? I can't let Agnes continue doing this to Olivia and Theo." "I understand your urgency, but if we act hastily, it could disappear and we'll never know the reach of this network. Worse still, it could try something drastic if it feels cornered." The possibility of Agnes becoming more dangerous if she discovered Marco knew the truth made his stomach clench. He needed to protect the children, but he also needed to be clever about how to proceed. The next day, Marco feigned normalcy while observing Agnes with new eyes. She continued her routine as if nothing had changed, but he now perceived the calculated coldness behind each action. During lunch, Rose discreetly pulled him toward the laundry room. "Mr. Marco, I need to tell you something important." "What is it, Rose?" "Last night, after you went upstairs, I heard Mrs. Agnes talking on the phone. She was talking about the children, about you, and mentioned something about speeding up the schedule." Marco felt his blood run cold. "Accelerate what schedule?" "I didn't hear everything, but she said you were becoming resistant, and that maybe it was time to implement Phase 2. "Phase 2 of what?" Rose shook her head. "I don't know, sir, but she seemed different, cold. She wasn't the same kind person she pretended to be these past few weeks." Marco thanked Rose for her courage in speaking up and asked her to continue observing and reporting anything suspicious. He also advised her to keep the children in sight whenever possible. That afternoon, Marco decided to subtly confront Agnes about some inconsistencies in her story. Over coffee, he casually asked about her past experience. "Agnes, you mentioned having worked as a teacher. At which school?" Agnes hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "Several private schools. I'd rather not go into details about previous jobs." "Why?" "Confidentiality issues. Families value discretion." Marco nodded, but pressed a little harder. "And how exactly did you meet Helena?" Again a hesitation. "We met at a support group for mothers. Helena was going through a difficult time." The answer sounded fabricated. Helena had never mentioned participating in support groups, and Marco doubted she had sought that kind of help. "What kind of difficult time?" Agnes began to look uncomfortable. "Marco, perhaps it's best not to stir up the past. Helena is gone, and the important thing now is to take care of the children." "But I want to understand. If you two were close friends, Helena must have shared with you the reasons why. She was unhappy in our marriage." Agnes remained silent for a long moment, her eyes calculating furiously. "She mentioned feeling suffocated, as if she couldn't be herself." The description didn't match the Helena Marco knew. His ex-wife had always been independent and assertive, not someone who would feel easily stifled. "Suffocated how?" "Marco, this is painful for you. Perhaps we should focus on the future." Agnes was clearly trying to end the conversation, but Marco persisted. "No, I want to understand. If Helena was suffering and I didn't realize it, I need to know so I don't repeat the same mistakes." Agnes studied him with cold eyes, and for a moment Marco saw the mask slip. There was something predatory in her gaze, something that had nothing to do with affection or concern. Helena felt that you never really saw her, that you were more interested in your career than in your family. She needed attention, validation, someone who truly cared about her feelings. The words were delivered like knives, each one deliberately chosen to maximize the pain and guilt. Marco realized that Agnes was using his own insecurity against him, planting seeds of doubt about his worth as a husband and father. "And you offered that to her?" Marco asked, his voice dangerously calm. Agnes smiled, but there was no sweetness in it. "I offered understanding, something she didn't find at home." The implication was clear. Agnes was suggesting that she had been a close confidant of Helena's, perhaps even that she had encouraged the separation. Marco began to wonder if Helena's sudden departure had truly been spontaneous, or if it had been orchestrated by Agnes from the start. That night, Marco made a decision that would change everything. He needed to contact Helena. If Agnes had manipulated her, departure. Helena deserved to know the truth, and her children deserved to have their mother back. She waited until Agnes had put the children to bed before locking herself in her office. With trembling hands, she dialed the number Helena had left for emergencies. The phone rang several times before a familiar but hesitant voice answered. "Marco, did something happen to the children?" The immediate concern in Helena's voice confirmed what Marco had always known in his heart. She hadn't abandoned her children for lack of love. "Helena, the children are... They're physically fine, but I need to talk. To you about Agnes Muller." Silence on the other end of the line. Then a gasping breath. "Agnes? How could you... Marco, please tell me she's not at our house." The panic in Helena's voice made Marco's heart race. "She's been here for almost 2 months taking care of the children. She said she was your friend." "Oh my God, Marco, no, she's not my friend. I ran away from her." "What do you mean you ran away?" Helena began to cry on the other end of the line. "Marco, I didn't want to leave you. I never wanted to abandon you and the children. But Agnes, she was manipulating me, slowly poisoning me. I thought I was going crazy." Marco felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "Poisoning? How?" "She came into my life about 6 months before I passed away. She said she was a therapist and that she could help me with the postpartum depression I was still experiencing because of Theo. At first, she seemed like an angel. She listened to me, understood me, and offered me teas and supplements that she said would help me." Marco remembered the teas Agnes used to make for him. "What happened next?" "Gradually, I started to feel confused, paranoid. Agnes said that you didn't love me anymore, that you were planning to file for divorce and get custody of the children. She showed me evidence, conversations she claimed to have overheard, documents that looked legal. I was so confused that I started to believe it." Marco clenched his fists. Agnes had used Helena's postpartum vulnerability against her, creating a false reality through psychological manipulation and probably drugs. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried a few times, but Agnes was always there, reminding me that you were too busy or too stressed to listen to me, and I felt so confused that I began to doubt my own perception of reality." Helena continued, her voice breaking. "In the end, Agnes convinced me that the only way to protect the children was to stay away. She said that if I stayed, you would use my mental instability against me in court, and I would lose any chance of seeing them again." "And you believed that?" "Marco, I had been on drugs for months. My judgment was completely impaired. Agnes helped me plan my departure, saying it was temporary, just until I recovered. She promised she would take care of the children until I returned." Agnes's diabolical plan was beginning to make sense. She had systematically destroyed Marco's marriage, removed Helena from the equation, and now had complete access to the children. "Helena, where are you now?" "In a rehabilitation clinic in the capital. It took me months to understand that I had been manipulated, and even longer to detoxify my body from the substances she gave me. I'm better now, more lucid, but still afraid that you won't believe me." "I believe you," Marco said firmly. "Agnes is doing the same thing to me and the children. I found a notebook where she documents her manipulation techniques. Notebook? Helena's voice became sharp. Marco, if she has a notebook, that means there are other families. Agnes doesn't work alone. I know. I saw other family names in your notes. You need to get the children out of there immediately. If Agnes finds out you know the truth, she might try something drastic. Marco glanced at the office door, checking that it was properly locked. What kind of drastic thing? I don't know exactly, but before leaving, I overheard a phone conversation of hers. She mentioned asset relocation and extreme measures. At the time, I thought I was delirious, but now, relocation of assets? Do you think she was referring to the children? It's possible. Marco, you need to call the police now. I've already spoken to my lawyer. We're gathering evidence, but it's complicated. Agnes is very intelligent, very careful. While you're gathering evidence, she's indoctrinating our children. Olivia must be completely transformed by now. Marco thought about his daughter, about how she had lost her vibrant personality and become an obedient doll. She is, and Theo, is being affected too. Marco, I'm coming back. I don't care if Agnes is still there. My children need me. No, Marco said quickly. If you show up now, Agnes might realize we've discovered the truth. That could put us all in danger. Let me try to remove her first. Helena reluctantly agreed, but insisted on maintaining daily contact. Marco promised to protect the children and work to gather enough evidence to bring down Agnes and her manipulative network. After hanging up, Marco sat in silence for a long time, processing everything he had discovered. Helena hadn't abandoned her family. Out of selfishness or instability, she had been systematically destroyed psychologically and forced to leave to protect the children from a threat she herself didn't fully understand at the time. The next day, Marco decided to implement a careful plan. First, he needed to protect the children without arousing Agnes's suspicions. Second, he needed to gather more substantial evidence. Third, he needed to find out more about the network of people involved. He began by casually suggesting that the children spend more time with Rose during the day. Agnes, you've been working so hard. How about Rose taking on more responsibilities with the children? You could have some free afternoons. Agnes studied him with calculating eyes. The children are adapting well to the current routine. Changes can confuse them. But you deserve a break. Besides, Rose has known the children longer. It might be good for them to have consistency with someone familiar. Rose has no training in child development, Agnes replied coldly. She could inadvertently jeopardize the progress we've made. Marco noticed how Agnes referred to working with the children as progress, as if they were projects to be molded rather than human beings with their own personalities. What kind of progress? Agnes smiled, but there was something icy in her expression. Olivia is learning self-control and appropriate femininity. Theo is developing emotional independence. These are important milestones for children who have suffered family trauma. The way Agnes spoke about her children as objects of study made Marco feel nauseous. He forced himself to maintain a neutral expression. Perhaps you could explain your techniques to me in more detail. As a father, I'd like to understand what you're doing so I can support you at home. Agnes tilted her head, studying him intently. You seem more interested in the children's development lately. What has changed? The question was asked casually, but Marco sensed the underlying tension. Agnes was testing him, trying to determine if he had discovered something. I realized I've been negligent as a father. The positive changes in the children made me realize how much they needed structure. Agnes seemed to relax slightly. It's natural that it took you a while to process Helena's departure. Parental trauma affects the whole family. Marco nodded, but internally he was seething. Agnes was using the pain of separation as an excuse for her manipulation, turning him into an unwitting accomplice in the psychological abuse of his own children. That afternoon, while Agnes was at the market, Marco took the opportunity to discreetly photograph the pages of the notebook. Using his phone, he documented each page, each note, each list of names. The evidence was disturbing. Agnes was not only manipulating her family, but coordinating a complex network of infiltration into vulnerable families. He also found a second notebook hidden under a pile of clothes. This one contained even more alarming information: addresses of other cities, codes that seemed to refer to different operations, and a list of children with specific ages and characteristics. Relocation project, final phase. Selected children: Olivia A., 8 years old, complete impression; Theo A., 2 years old, successful primary impression. Expected transition date: next week. Marco felt the world spinning around him. Agnes was planning to take their children away. The relocation didn't just refer to moving house. She intended to remove them from her life completely. His hands trembled as he photographed the pages. He needed to act immediately, but also carefully. If Agnes suspected he had discovered the plan, she might accelerate the timeline or become dangerous. Marco heard the sound of Agnes's car arriving and quickly put the notebooks away exactly as he found them. He went downstairs to the kitchen, trying to appear normal while his heart pounded wildly. "Marco," Agnes called as she entered. "Where are you?" "Here in the kitchen," he replied, forcing normalcy into his voice. Agnes appeared carrying shopping bags, but her eyes immediately went upstairs, as if checking if anything had changed in her absence. "How were the children?" "Well behaved, as always," Marco lied. In reality, he had spent the entire time in her room gathering evidence. Agnes nodded, but still looked suspicious. "Rose said you went upstairs. A little while ago, were you looking for something?" Marco felt his blood run cold. Had Rose mentioned that he had gone upstairs, or was Agnes testing him? "I went to the bathroom and then checked on the children. Theo was crying." "Theo rarely cries now," Agnes observed. "Perhaps you heard something else." The way she said it sounded almost like an accusation. Marco realized that Agnes was becoming more vigilant, more suspicious. Time was running out. "Agnes, I need to travel for work tomorrow," Marco lied. "It will only be for one day, but I would like you to keep a special eye on the children." Agnes smiled, but there was triumph in her eyes. "Of course, you can rest assured. The children will be in excellent hands." Marco nodded, but he knew Agnes had interpreted his trip as a perfect opportunity to accelerate her plans. He hadn't intended to travel. He intended to use the day to implement his own protection strategy. That night, Marco called Victor again. "Things are accelerating. Agnes is planning to remove the children from the house next week." "Marco, this is no longer a civil matter. It's a planned kidnapping. You need to call the police immediately." "What if they don't believe me? What if Agnes manages to convince them that I'm a paranoid father trying to defame a dedicated caregiver?" "You have the photographs of the notebook. That's sufficient evidence." Marco hoped Victor was right. They scheduled a meeting for the following morning with a detective specializing in crimes against children. It was a risk. If the investigation didn't progress quickly, Agnes might find out and disappear with Olivia and Theo forever. Meanwhile, Marco needed to protect the children for another night, feigning ignorance while he planned how to save his family from a predator who had invaded his life disguised as a savior. Agnes, on the other side of the wall, was probably planning something too. And Marco had a terrible feeling that time was running out quickly for all of them. Marco barely slept that night. With every sound in the house, every creak of the woodwork, he wondered if Agnes was implementing her plans sooner than expected. At 5 in the morning, he gave up trying to rest and quietly went down to the kitchen. Rose was already there, making coffee with a worried expression. "Mr. Marco, couldn't you sleep?" "Rose, I need you to do something very important for me today," Marco whispered. "Don't leave the children alone with Agnes for even a minute. Make excuses if necessary, but always stay close by." Rose nodded gravely. "I knew something was wrong. Last night I heard Mrs. Agnes talking on the phone again. She mentioned something about finalizing the transfer." Marco felt his stomach clench. "What time?" "After midnight." She spoke softly but said something like, "The packages will be ready for transport on Thursday." Thursday was in 2 days. Agnes had significantly accelerated her schedule. "Rose, I'm meeting with the police today. If Agnes asks where I am, tell her I went to work as usual, and if she tries to take the children anywhere, stop her by any means possible." At 8 in the morning, Marco left home pretending to go to the office. Instead, he drove straight to the police station where Victor had scheduled a meeting with Detective Anna Carmin, a specialist in crimes against children. Anna was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a posture that conveyed competence and determination. She listened attentively as Marco recounted the entire situation, showing her the photographs from the notebook and explaining the changes in the children. Mr. Allianz, what you are describing is a systematic pattern of psychological abuse and preparation for kidnapping, Anna said, after examining the evidence. These notes are extremely detailed and indicate prior experience in family manipulation. What can we do? First, we're going to verify Agnes Muller's real identity. I suspect it's a false name. Second, I'm going to coordinate an operation to intercept her before she can carry out any plan to remove the children. Anna explained that the investigation would have to be quick but thorough. If Agnes was part of an organized network, as the evidence suggested, she might have escape routes prepared and accomplices ready to help her. How long has your ex-wife been in treatment? Anna asked. About 6 months. I need to talk to her. If Agnes used the same techniques with her wife, Helena can provide valuable information about methods and possible connections. Marco provided Helena's contact information, and Anna immediately put her team to work, checking Agnes's background and analyzing the photographs in the notebook. Mr. Allianz, I'll be direct with you. We need to act today. If Agnes really plans to relocate the children on Thursday, we can't wait any longer to gather additional evidence. Marco agreed, but he was terrified that his actions might put Olivia and Theo in greater danger. I'm going to send an undercover team to watch your house immediately, Anna continued, and I want you to go back home and act normally. You can't give any indication that you were here or that you're aware of Agnes's plans. The drive back home was the longest of Marco's life. Each traffic light seemed to last an eternity, and he found himself imagining terrible scenarios of what might be happening to the children. When she arrived, she found the house seemingly normal. Agnes was in the living room playing with Theo, while Rose was preparing lunch in the kitchen. Olivia was sitting at the dining room table, coloring in a book. "Marco!" Agnes exclaimed with a radiant smile. "How was your morning?" "Productive," Marco replied, forcing normalcy. "How are the children?" "Perfect, as always." Olivia finished her calligraphy exercises, and Theo learned 3 new words. Marco watched Theo playing on the floor. The boy seemed more lively than in recent days, and this alarmed him. Could Agnes have given him something to make him more docile and easier to transport? What words did he learn? "Trip, car, and new house," Agnes replied, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Marco's blood ran cold. Agnes was conditioning Theo to accept an imminent change. The new words were no coincidence, they were psychological preparation. Why these specific words? Agnes shrugged casually. Children that age absorb vocabulary related to recent experiences. Perhaps he overheard conversations about travel. Marco knew it was a lie. Agnes was deliberately preparing Theo for what was to come. During lunch, Marco observed Agnes more closely than ever before. She seemed tense, despite her efforts to maintain a normal facade. Her eyes darted constantly, as if she were calculating something, and he noticed she checked her watch with unusual frequency. "Agnes, do you have any appointments this afternoon?" "No, why?" "You seem a little agitated." Agnes forced a laugh. "Just thinking about the week's routine. I want to make sure the children have all the necessary activities." After lunch, Marco went up to his office, but left the door ajar so he could listen for any movement in the house. Less than 10 minutes later, he heard Agnes coming upstairs. Silently, he approached the door and saw her entering his room with a haste that confirmed his suspicions. Marco waited a few minutes before going downstairs discreetly. He found Rose in the kitchen, washing dishes nervously. "Rose, where are the children?" "Olivia is in her room reading. Theo is napping in the living room." "And Agnes?" "He came upstairs a little while ago. He said he was organizing some things." Marco felt a pang of panic. "What kind of things?" "I don't know, sir, but I saw her carrying a small suitcase to the room." "A suitcase? Agnes, was getting ready to leave and probably planned to take the children with her. Marco quickly went upstairs to Olivia's room. He found his daughter sitting on the bed, but not reading as Rose had said. Instead, she was packing her clothes into a small backpack. "Olivia, what are you doing?" The girl looked at him with confused eyes. "Agnes said we're going on a special trip. She told me to pack my favorite things." Marco knelt beside the bed, trying to keep his voice calm. "What kind of special trip?" "To a place where I will learn to be a real princess. Agnes said that there I will have many friends and special teachers." Marco's heart sank. Agnes was using Olivia's childlike disguise to mask what was really a planned kidnapping. "Olivia, do you want to take this trip?" The girl hesitated, a look of confusion crossing her face. "Agnes said I'll like it a lot, but I'll miss Daddy and Theo." "What if I told you that you don't have to go?" Olivia seemed even more confused. "But Agnes said it's mandatory, that girls my age need to learn important things." Marco realized that Agnes had conditioned Olivia to believe that the trip was inevitable and necessary. The girl didn't understand that she had a choice in the matter. "Olivia, stop packing your backpack for now, okay? Dad needs to talk to Agnes about this trip." Marco descended the stairs with determination, but when he reached the ground floor, Rose intercepted him with an alarmed expression. "Mr. Marco, Mrs. Agnes came down here and took Theo outside. She said she was going to show him the flowers in the garden, but they're not in the garden." Marco ran to the front window. Agnes's car wasn't in the garage. She had taken Theo. Panicking, Marco immediately called Anna Carmen. "Detective, Agnes took my son. They're not home." "Calm down, Marco. Our surveillance team followed them. They're 2 blocks from your house at a playground. It seems she's testing to see if you'll notice his absence." "Testing?" "Agnes is clever. She probably suspects you've discovered something and is watching your reaction. If you don't panic or look for Theo, she'll know you're aware of her plans." Marco forced himself to take a deep breath. "What should I do?" "Act like a normal father would. Look for them. Show casual concern. When she returns, ask where they were." Marco followed the instructions, going out into the garden and then walking around the block, looking for Agnes and Theo. When he returned, he found them in the living room, as if nothing had happened. "Where were you guys?" Marco asked, allowing a hint of genuine concern to color his voice. "Theo wanted to see the ducks in the park's lake," Agnes replied casually. "We didn't think you'd mind." It was a lie, of course. The park Agnes mentioned was 15 minutes from home, more than enough time for her to have tested Marco's reaction to his absence. "Next time, leave a note or let me know," Marco said. "I was worried when Rose said you two had gone out." Agnes nodded understandingly, but Marco saw a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. She had obtained the information she was looking for. Marco was aware of her movements and concerned about the children's whereabouts. That afternoon, Agnes stayed unusually close to the children, rarely leaving their field of vision. She also began making subtle comments about changes and adventures, clearly continuing the conditioning process. "Theo, would you like to meet other children who like the same games as you? Olivia, imagine how exciting it would be to learn new things in a completely different place." Marco watched with growing horror as Agnes planted seeds of acceptance for what was to come. She was psychologically preparing the children to be removed from their lives, making them believe it would be an exciting adventure instead of a kidnapping. At 6 o'clock in the afternoon, Marco's phone rang. It was Anna Carmen. "Marco, we have important news. Agnes Muller's identity is false, as we suspected. Her fingerprints match those of a woman named Chiara Sallin, wanted in 3 states for fraud and child abduction." Marco felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Agnes, or Chiara, was a wanted criminal. "There's more," Anna continued. "We found evidence that she's part of a network that traffics children for illegal adoptions. The children are psychologically groomed and then sold to families in other countries who pay substantial sums for private adoptions." Marco had to lean against the wall to avoid falling. His children were not only in danger of psychological manipulation, they were being groomed to be sold. "We'll carry out the arrest operation early tomorrow." "Morning," Anna said. "But Marco, you need to act completely normal tonight. If Chiara suspects she's about to be arrested, she might try to drastically accelerate her plans. Marco agreed, but he knew the longest night of his life was only beginning. He had to protect Olivia and Theo from a professional predator who was planning to remove them from his life forever, all while pretending not to know anything. The night dragged on like an eternity. Marco pretended to eat dinner normally, participated in the routine of putting the children to bed, and even accepted a cup of the relaxing tea that Agnes offered him, discreetly pouring the contents into a nearby vase when she wasn't looking. At 10 o'clock at night, when the house finally fell silent, Marco locked himself in his room and sent a message to Anna. "Everything normal. Waiting for tomorrow." The reply came immediately. "Team positioned. Operation at 6 a.m. Marco tried to rest, but with every noise in the house his body tensed. Around midnight, he heard footsteps in the hallway. Silently, he opened the door slightly and saw Agnes, Chiara, coming down the stairs carrying 2 small backpacks. Her heart raced. She was speeding up the plan. Marco waited a few minutes before leaving the room. He quietly went downstairs and saw a light in the kitchen. He approached carefully and heard Chiara speaking softly on the phone. "The situation is getting complicated. The target is more vigilant than expected. Yes, we need to speed things up. Tonight, the packages are already psychologically prepared. Meeting point at 3 in the morning. Marco felt pure panic. Chiara planned to take the children in less than 3 hours. He couldn't wait for the morning police operation. He quietly went back upstairs to his room and called Anna. "Detective, she's planning on taking the children tonight. I overheard a phone conversation." "What time?" 3 in the morning. He mentioned a meeting point. Anna whispered something to someone beside her before replying, "Marco, let's speed up the operation. Our team is getting into position now, but you need to make sure the children are safe until we arrive." "As?" "Lock the children's bedroom doors from the outside if possible. Do anything to prevent her from accessing them." Marco checked his watch, 12:47. He had just over 2 hours before Chiara's meeting point. He quietly left his room and went to Olivia's room first. The girl was fast asleep. The backpack she had packed earlier was beside the bed. Marco picked it up quietly and noticed that Chiara had added documents, probably fake birth certificates or custody transfer papers. There was no external lock on Olivia's room, but Marco discreetly moved a heavy chair closer to the door. If Chiara tried to enter, at least she would make noise. In Theo's room, the situation was even more alarming. The baby was sleeping, but Marco noticed a small bottle on the bedside table, probably some sedative to keep Theo calm during transport. Marco took the vial and hid it in his own room. Without it, Chiara would have difficulty keeping Theo quiet during any attempt at removal. At 2 in the morning, Marco heard movement downstairs again. Chiara was preparing for the final phase of her plan. Marco went downstairs quietly and saw that the front door was unlocked. There was a dark van parked on the street, its lights off but the engine running. Chiara climbed the stairs with efficient and determined movements. Marco followed her at a distance, remaining in the shadows. She went to Theo's room first. Marco heard her searching for the sedative bottle and her frustration when she couldn't find it. Then she tried to lift Theo, but the boy, without the sedative, woke up and started crying. "Shh, Theo. Let's take our special trip now," Marco heard Chiara whisper. But her voice had lost all its false sweetness. Now it sounded cold and impatient. Marco knew he had to act. He couldn't wait any longer for the police. "Let go of my son," he said, appearing in the doorway of the room. Chiara turned, still holding Theo. Her face had completely transformed. There was no trace left of the gentle and caring Agnes. Her eyes were hard, calculating, dangerous. "Marco, I figured you had figured it out. Put Theo in the crib and get out of my house." Chiara laughed coldly. "You don't understand the situation, do you? These children are no longer yours. Legally, I've been their temporary guardian since Helena was declared mentally unstable." "That's a lie." "Really?" Chiara pulled documents from her pocket. A declaration of mental incapacity for Helena Allianz, signed by a licensed psychiatrist. A declaration of paternal neglect, attesting that you are emotionally, absent and potentially harmful to the children, and finally documents transferring temporary custody to me. Marco picked up the papers and examined them quickly. They looked official, with stamps and signatures that appeared authentic. "They're fake," he said, though a part of him doubted it. Chiara was clearly an experienced professional. "Prove it," Chiara challenged. "Call the police, Marco. They'll find evidence that you're a negligent father who left your children vulnerable. They'll find drugs in your drawer planted there by your own dedicated caregiver. They'll discover you have a history of erratic behavior and that your children show signs of trauma caused by your emotional instability." Marco realized the extent of the manipulation. Chiara hadn't just molded the children. She had constructed an entire narrative that painted him as an inadequate father, creating legal justification to remove the children from his custody. "You've done this before," Marco said, understanding, "with other families. Often. Broken families are so easy to fix when you remove the problematic elements." Chiara hugged Theo tightly, and the boy cried louder. "These children will have a much better life with their new families. Families that can adequately pay for well-educated and psychologically prepared children." "You are selling my children. I am reallocating human resources to more suitable environments. It is a valuable service for families who cannot have children naturally." The coldness with which Chiara spoke of children as assets made Marco's stomach churn. This woman had no humanity left. "Olivia!" Marco shouted, running to his daughter's room. "Olivia, wake up!" Chiara followed him, still carrying Theo. "It's no use, Marco. Olivia is already psychologically prepared for the transition. She believes she's going to a special school for princesses. She'll cooperate completely." Marco found Olivia sitting on the bed, rubbing her eyes. Upon seeing Marco and Chiara at the door, she seemed confused. "Dad, is it time for the special trip?" "No, darling, there's no special trip." "Agnes, Chiara was lying to you." Olivia looked between Marco and Chiara, clearly confused. Months of psychological conditioning couldn't be undone in a few minutes. But Agnes said, "Olivia," Chiara interrupted softly, resuming her maternal persona, "remember what we talked about regarding confused adults. Sometimes dads get confused and say things that aren't true." Marco watched in horror as Olivia nodded, believing Chiara instead of him. The psychological manipulation had been so complete that his own daughter doubted his words. That's when he heard the sound he'd been waiting for, police sirens approaching. Chiara's face changed instantly. The maternal mask vanished completely, replaced by cold rage. "You called the police?" "Yes, I called." Chiara put Theo down and took a phone out of her pocket, dialing quickly. "Abort operation, I repeat, abort operation. Target compromised." Marco heard voices downstairs. "Police! House surrounded!" Chiara looked around frantically, then grabbed Olivia by the arm. "If you handed us over, then there's no reason to keep up appearances," she said coldly. "These children are worth a lot of money, and I'm not leaving here empty-handed. Leave my daughter alone." "Marco!" Anna Carmen's voice echoed from the stairs. "Where are you?" "Up here!" Marco shouted. Chiara pulled Olivia closer. "Tell them to back off, or the girl will get hurt." Marco saw panic in Olivia's eyes for the first time in months. Chiara's gentle mask had completely fallen, and Olivia was finally seeing the true nature of the person she had trusted. "Aunt Agnes?" Olivia whispered, confused and frightened. "Shut up!" Chiara reprimanded harshly, gripping the girl's arm tightly enough to leave marks. It was this sudden brutality that finally broke the psychological conditioning. Olivia began to cry, not the controlled crying that Chiara had taught her, but the genuine crying of a frightened child. Anna Carmen appeared at the top of the stairs with 3 other officers, all with weapons drawn. "Chiara Sallin, you are under arrest. Release the child." Chiara laughed bitterly. "Chiara Sallin is just one of my names. You have no idea what you're dealing with. We know exactly who you are. We know about the trafficking network. We know about the other families, and we know this ends now." For a moment, Chiara seemed to be considering her options. Then suddenly she pushed Olivia toward Marco and ran to the bedroom window. "This doesn't end here," she shouted as she threw open the window. There are many others like me, and there are many other broken families waiting to be fixed. Before anyone could stop her, Chiara jumped from the second-story window. Marco ran to look and saw her surrounded by officers in the garden. She had survived the fall, but was clearly injured and unable to escape. As Anna and her team went down to process the arrest, Marco embraced his two children. Olivia wept uncontrollably, months of confusion and fear finally being released. Theo, though still too young to fully comprehend what had happened, clung to his father as if he never wanted to let go. "Daddy," Olivia sobbed, "I didn't want to take the special trip. I just wanted to be with you." "I know, darling, I know. Agnes, Chiara lied to you about many things, but now she's gone, and you're safe." Rose appeared in the doorway, crying with relief. "Are the children all right?" "They are," Marco replied, pulling Rose into a familiar embrace. "They're okay now." Through the window, Marco could see Chiara, being placed in an ambulance under police escort. Her expression, though wounded and defeated, remained cold and calculating. Marco knew that even imprisoned, she would represent a constant danger. People like her didn't give up easily. But in that moment, embracing his children, Marco allowed himself to feel relief for the first time in months. His family was safe. The children were with him. And for the first time since Helena had left, he felt he could truly protect the people he loved most in the world. In the weeks following Chiara's arrest, the Allianz family home underwent a profound transformation. Marco had taken leave from his office to dedicate himself to his children's emotional recovery. Olivia needed time to distinguish between Chiara's lies and reality. During sessions with a child psychologist, she gradually recovered her authentic personality. Pink was replaced by blue again, and her drawings returned to depicting courageous adventures. "Dad," Olivia said one afternoon, sketching in the kitchen, "I remember why I didn't like pink dresses. They made me feel like I wasn't myself." Marco smiled. "And who are you really, Olivia?" "I'm the girl who likes blue, who isn't afraid to climb trees, and who wants to be an astronaut," she replied with renewed conviction. Theo was also showing signs of recovery. He had stopped looking for Aunt Agnes and had returned to being the cheerful boy he once was. Rose expressed her feelings. "Mr. Marco, I always felt something was wrong. That woman made everything seem normal, even when it wasn't." Anna Carmen's investigation revealed the chilling extent of Chiara's network. The woman had been observing the family for months before Helena left, waiting for the perfect moment. Helena, it turned out, had no knowledge of the scheme. "She studied our family like a predator," Marco explained to Anna. "She knew exactly how to exploit our vulnerability." The dismantled network led to the discovery of dozens of trafficked children. Marco, moved by the situation, created a support fund for the victims' families. A month after the events, Helena called. She had seen the news and was terrified. "Marco, I swear I didn't know anything," she cried on the phone. "When I saw the news, I thought about what could have happened to Olivia and Theo." "I know. The police confirmed that you weren't involved." "Can I see the children? I know I don't deserve it, but I want to make sure they're okay." Marco looked at the children playing in the garden. "Helena, they are recovering. If you want to be a part of their lives again, you're going to need time and a lot of work." "I understand," Helena whispered. "I'm willing to do whatever is necessary." That night, putting the children to bed, Marco reflected on how close he had come to losing everything that mattered. His job, his money, his success. None of it would have meant anything if Olivia and Theo had disappeared. "Daddy," Olivia said sleepily, "you're not going to work so hard anymore, are you?" "No, dear. I've learned that there are far more important things than spreadsheets and meetings." "Like what?" "Like watching you draw. Like being there when you need me." Marco kissed Olivia's forehead and watched Theo sleeping. For a few minutes he simply gazed at his children, feeling immense gratitude for having them back. Outside, the city continued its frenetic routine, full of disguised predators. But inside that house, a family had survived the worst and emerged more united. Marco's story wasn't just about a man who almost lost his children. It was about rediscovering what truly matters, about the strength that emerges from vulnerability. and about how true love can overcome the most cruel manipulation. Marco turned off the lights and went to his room, knowing that for the first time in months, he would sleep soundly, with his children safe at home. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the Allianz family's journey has touched your hearts and opened your eyes to the hidden dangers that can threaten our families. The story of Marco, Helena, Olivia, and Theo reminds us that true love and family unity are our best defenses against those who try to manipulate and separate us. If this narrative moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories exploring the complexities of human relationships. Like this video if this family's recovery inspired you, and tell us in the comments how you protect your own families from the invisible dangers that surround us. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we bring you unique stories that celebrate the strength of the human spirit in the face of adversity. Join us on this emotional journey, and don't miss our upcoming content that promises to touch your soul.